Have you ever noticed how something as simple as eating feels completely different depending on where you are? At home, the act is ordinary. A plate, a chair, a familiar table. But place yourself on a lonely road at night, or in a field where shadows stretch long, and suddenly a meal feels less like comfort and more like exposure. For travelers in centuries past, eating was never just eating. It was a decision that could determine whether they rested safely or drew danger closer. Hello everyone and welcome. In this story, you'll learn how even the act of having a meal could become risky in forgotten times. I gently remind you, if you find calm in these histories, consider subscribing so these quiet stories can keep reaching you. For travelers, meals were as much about survival as they were about nourishment. They carried bread, dried grains, fruit, or cheese, sometimes wrapped in cloth or kept in small wooden boxes. But the real challenge was never just what to eat. It was where to eat. Every bite taken in the wrong place could betray their presence, their wealth, or their weakness. Food was necessity, but it was also signal, and signals in the wrong place were dangerous. Imagine yourself on a long road. The sun dips, your feet are sore, and your stomach demands food. Do you stop by the roadside, where others may pass and see you? Do you step into a field where shadows might hide more than just grass? Do you risk a fire for warmth, knowing its light may call out like a beacon? Or do you eat in darkness, chewing quietly, hoping silence will protect you? These were the questions every traveler faced. Meals were choices, and choices carried risk. The wrong place to eat was sometimes obvious. Busy crossroads were never safe, for too many eyes passed through them. Eating there was like painting a target upon oneself. Bandits often lingered in such spots, knowing hunger would force travelers to pause. To stop there, to unwrap food, to relax, was to declare vulnerability. The wrong place could also be subtle, a hollow beside a road where sound carried too easily, a clearing where firelight spread far, or a riverside where one's reflection revealed movement to anyone watching. Food itself gave away too much. The smell of warm bread carried on the wind farther than one might expect. The crunch of dried grain or the crack of fruit skin broke silence that otherwise hid footsteps. Have you ever been in a still, quiet room and noticed how loud even the smallest sound seemed? Imagine that magnified by a night road. Travelers knew that sound betrayed, and meals were noisy. A careless bite could draw notice when silence was survival. There were also dangers in sharing. Companions sometimes sat together to eat, but even among groups, caution was needed. Strangers offered food to one another as tokens of trust, yet not all trust was earned. To accept food in the wrong place could mean sitting too close to someone who might later take more than they gave. A loaf broken by too many hands became a chance for betrayal, for envy, for conflict. The wrong place to eat was not only about the land around, but about the company kept. Parents taught children early, do not eat where you feel exposed. Children learn to chew quietly, to hide food, to move farther from roads before unwrapping even the smallest piece. Some travelers even walked as they ate, refusing to sit, believing that motion itself shielded them. To pause was to risk. To move was to survive. And so eating became less about comfort and more about calculation. Each meal was weighed not only by hunger, but by setting. Was the place too open, too near to others? Too quiet? Too loud? Too close to water? Too far from safety? The wrong place could be anywhere, and travelers carried this awareness like an extra burden alongside their food. Have you ever delayed a meal until you felt safer? Perhaps skipping lunch until work was done, or holding back until you reached your own home. That simple hesitation echoes the choices of past travelers. They too often starved their hunger until the place felt right, until shadows seemed distant enough, until silence seemed soft enough to allow the act of chewing without dread. The truth was simple yet harsh. Food fed the body, but the wrong place could betray it. And because of this, travelers learned to measure each meal with care. Hunger was constant, but danger was patient. The road itself reminded them that survival was not only about what you carried, but about where you dared to rest, unwrap, and eat. Have you ever noticed how a simple sound becomes louder when everything else is quiet? A spoon tapping a bowl in a silent room, the rustle of paper in the stillness of night. These ordinary noises suddenly feel sharp, almost unsettling. For travelers in earlier centuries, this truth shaped every meal after sunset. Silence was both their shield and their betrayer. While silence hid them from the chaos of the world, it also magnified every small sound they made while eating. A crunch, a sip, even the tearing of bread. All of these became signals that could reach ears not meant to hear them. Travelers soon learned that meals carried weight far beyond hunger. Imagine a man and his companions resting after hours of walking. They sit in a grove of trees, unwrap their food, and begin to chew. To them, the act feels small, necessary, but the forest around them is still, and their every bite cracks like twigs underfoot. A fox in the distance pricks its ears. A wanderer, walking far off, pauses, unsure if he heard something. A group of strangers, waiting to see if travelers pass, suddenly know exactly where to find them. The silence that should have hidden them has betrayed them instead. Because of this, travelers often whispered rules to each other. Never eat where silence is too deep. Never chew too loudly. Never strike flint for light in the quietest hours. Some believed that breaking silence while eating was as dangerous as leaving gold on a table. For silence, once broken, spread outward like ripples in water. Have you ever been in a library or a hushed hall where the smallest cough echoed? That was the experience of the road. Every sound too large for its space. Every meal too loud for safety. But silence also held value. It was the one condition that allowed meals to pass unnoticed if managed with care. The careful traveler chewed slowly, pressed food softly between teeth, avoided sudden movement. Some wrapped cloth around their knives or bowls to keep them from clinking. Others placed themselves where natural noises helped mask their sounds, beside a river whose water murmured, under trees where leaves rustled, near a breeze that moved grass. They did not eat against silence. They wove their meals into it. There was also the danger of false silence, moments when the world grew too still, when even animals fell quiet. In such times, travelers hesitated to eat, sensing that silence itself was a warning. Have you ever felt unease in a place where no bird sang, no wind stirred? That was how a forest or field could feel at night. Travelers feared that such silence meant eyes were watching, that predators or thieves lurked unseen. In those moments, to eat was to expose oneself. Many chose to wait, hungry but cautious, until natural sounds returned. Groups learned to balance noise together. One companion would keep watch while the others ate, ears straining to hear anything beyond the chewing. They rotated their meals, never all eating at once. In this way, silence became a tool, broken carefully, controlled, shared in turns. They turned what seemed like weakness into method, managing their risks step by step. Children, too, were taught the lessons of silence. Parents hushed them quickly when they laughed too loudly or crunched too eagerly. Some games were invented to train them, challenging them to eat without making a sound, rewarding them when they succeeded. What began as play became survival. By the time these children grew into travelers themselves, they no longer needed reminding. Silence during supper was instinct. The memory of silence often lingered after journeys ended. Men who had walked miles at night sometimes found themselves eating quietly, even at home, as though still surrounded by unseen threats. Women who had carried food across lonely fields stirred softly, out of habit, long after danger had passed. Silence during meals shaped not just nights on the road, but entire lives. And so, for travelers, supper was not only about feeding hunger. It was about learning how to exist inside silence without shattering it. Each meal was measured not only by taste, but by sound. Each bite tested against stillness. Silence was both ally and adversary. It shielded from discovery, yet betrayed with the smallest noise. The wrong place to eat was not always at crossroads or a roadside. Sometimes it was simply the heart of silence itself, too still to forgive the breaking of it. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly known what someone had cooked, even before you saw it? A faint sweetness in the air tells you fruit was sliced. A sharp tang reveals onions. A smoky edge clings when bread has been baked or toasted. Now imagine that sensation not in a kitchen, but in the open night, where the air is otherwise empty. For travelers in centuries past, food carried more than flavor. It carried signals. Smells and sounds moved farther than sight, betraying where someone rested long before they could be seen. Travelers quickly discovered that the act of eating was never private. A loaf broken open released its fragrance. A pot simmering over coals carried its aroma on the breeze. Even something as small as cheese or dried meat left a trail that sharper noses could follow. Have you ever been able to tell what your neighbors are cooking through the window? On an empty road where no other scent existed, those signals traveled even farther. The wrong place to eat was any place where the smell of food could wander away faster than you could finish it. Smells were not the only betrayers. The sound of tearing bread, of fruit crunching, of water poured into a cup, all of it could travel strangely in silence. Wind carried those noises sideways, bouncing them between trees or walls. A traveler might sit believing they were hidden, but half a mile away, another ear might catch the faintest sound of their meal. It was a reminder that food was not only comfort, but a loud announcement. I am here. This danger was sharper at night, when other senses ruled. People depended less on sight and more on hearing and smelling. Predators, human or animal, were drawn to such cues. A bandit listening for opportunity did not need to see a traveler's fire. He only needed the smell of cooked grain or the sound of bread snapping. Wolves, too, were said to circle paths when the scent of food drifted their way. For this reason, many chose to eat plain, dry rations while on the move, saving anything fragrant for safer times. Travelers invented small tricks to mask their meals. Some buried scraps quickly, covering them with earth to smother the smell. Others wrapped uneaten pieces in cloth soaked with herbs, hoping stronger scents would disguise weaker ones. A few even carried food, chosen not for taste, but for its quietness and dullness. Hard biscuits, dry roots, simple grain. These were not pleasant meals, but they were silent and nearly scentless, and that meant safety. Have you ever chosen something bland because it was easier? For travelers, the choice was often between dull food and dangerous food. Company changed these risks, too. A group eating together multiplied their signal. More food meant stronger smells, more voices, more sound. And yet, some travelers felt safer in numbers, believing that if they were discovered, they at least had more hands to defend themselves. Others argued that groups were easier to find, harder to hide, and thus should eat sparingly when in dangerous stretches. Each company decided differently, but the lesson was the same. Food gave away more than hunger. The problem extended even to storage. Bags that had carried food too long began to smell of it. Leather soaked in grease, cloth infused with grain, wooden boxes carrying the faint sweetness of fruit. These became beacons to any who knew how to follow them. Some said experienced bandits could tell what a traveler carried just by the scent of their belongings. Whether true or not, the fear of it made travelers all the more cautious. And then there was the problem of time. Smells lingered long after meals ended. A traveler might believe he had eaten in safety and moved on, but the place he left behind betrayed him. A robber or a scout might pass through an hour later and know exactly that someone had stopped there. Trails became easier to follow, camps easier to predict, all because food announced what eyes had missed. Have you ever noticed how memory clings to scent longer than to sight? Travelers learned this lesson too well. The memory of danger linked to meals never left them. Some would later confess that even in safety at home, they hesitated to cook or eat anything with a strong smell after dark. Their bodies had learned to associate fragrance with risk. Food, then, was never neutral. It fed the body, but revealed the person. It offered comfort, but carried risk. And for every traveler who sat down after a long day, breaking bread with weary hands, there lingered the unshakable thought. Who else might smell this? Who else might be listening? And more dangerously, who else might already be coming closer? Have you ever sat down at a busy table and realized halfway through your first bite that you were learning as much about the people around you as they were learning about you? In the quiet of the road, a meal made its own noise. In a crowd, that noise was swallowed, but so, too, was your safety. Many travelers chose crowds to hide their presence after sunset, believing that bustle would blur them. It often did, yet the same press of bodies that softened their sound also gathered eyes, hands, and motives too close for comfort. Crowded tables promised cover. A cook shop's long bench, a wayhouse hall on a market night, a row of stools at a stall just off the road. Here, the clatter of bowls masked the snap of bread, and the murmur of talk buried the small noises of eating. After the lessons of silence, this seemed like relief. But relief arrived with a price. The first price was attention in fragments. In a crowd, people did not stare. They glanced. Glances were harder to notice than stares and more dangerous. A glance measured the weight of your pack when you shifted it. Another measured the coin when you paid. A third measured hunger in your face and judged how tired you were. 100 small calculations surrounded your spoon. Where you sat mattered as much as what you ate. Travelers looked first for a wall, not for comfort, but for boundary. A back to wood meant only one direction to watch. Doors were avoided unless no choice remained. A doorway was a frame that caught whoever passed. Sitting there made you part of a picture others could study at leisure. Corners were not automatically safe. Crowds funneled toward them when the room filled, turning refuge into trap. The best place was a wall's middle, opposite the main light, near enough to hear movement but not so near that faces were perfectly clear to you, because faces perfectly clear to you were faces to whom you were perfectly clear. Bags and bundles became awkward companions at crowded tables. On the road they could be pillows, but on benches they were invitations. Set a bag by your feet, and a stranger's heel accidentally met the strap. Hang it on the chair back, and you declared where its weight rested while you chewed. The safest place was neither. Travelers learned to thread a strap around the thigh beneath the table and lay the bag across their calves. A simple drop of the knee tightened the line. If someone tugged, they tugged your leg. Legs notice. Others looped a thin cord from bag to belt under the cloak. From the outside, it looked like ordinary cloth resting in a lap. Inside, it was a lock made of posture. Food, even plain food, announced status among strangers. A larger loaf, a better knife, a cleaner cloth, all these were as loud as a shout to the practiced eye. To lower your profile in a crowd, you did not lower your voice. You lowered your picture. Travelers dulled buckles with a smear of ash, wrapped good cloth inside poorer cloth, and cut bread with the least handsome blade they carried. They ate slowly, not from delicacy, but to avoid those quick, greedy glances crowds generate when someone finishes fast and looks for more. Hunger is catching, so is envy. To move like a person who has exactly enough is to move invisibly. Noise hid words, not meanings. The smart listener in a busy hall heard the language of movement instead, the scrape of a bench when someone shifted closer than a casual reach. The faint ring of metal when a neighbor's hand touched their own coins too often. The steady drip of a jug set down always in the same spot. A small habit of someone who had already measured where your elbow lay and whether your reach could cross. Travelers learned to listen with the side of their face, ear turned slightly toward the room, while eyes stayed on the bowl. To watch too openly invited attention. To listen thinly drew none. Paying for food was the most dangerous motion of all. In a crowd, payment showed scale and storage both. Where did your hand go? How deep did it dive? What sound did your coin make when it met the table? Travelers prepared the price before they sat, separating exact pieces from the rest and sliding them into a different pocket. This spared them the long, revealing search that said, "Here is where I keep the rest of my means." When exact change was impossible, they learned to overpay with smaller pieces, accepting a slower return if it meant never opening a larger purse in plain sight. The time to count was in the lane outside, never at the bench. Crowded tables made allies quickly, and unmade them quicker. The seatmate who passed bread might be the same hand that later moved a sleeve to hide your spoon. and yet refusing every kindness made you memorable, and memorable people are easier to follow when the room empties. Travelers practiced a narrow generosity, small trades that ended where they began. A scrap of cloth for a bone-handled pick, a mouthful of porridge for a mouthful of water. Exchanges that left no debt beyond the moment. Debts invited memory. Memory invited pursuit. Light and shadow played their own games. In crowded rooms, one candle did not simply make light. It made layers. Faces nearest the flame were legible. Faces just beyond it were not. Sitting where flicker crossed your features made you readable to others while telling you little about them. Savvier travelers chose the opposite, a seat just outside the flame's most honest circle, where they could watch silhouettes move but keep their own expressions soft and unread. Eyes tell as much as hands in a crowd. Better they be hazed than mirrors. Eating itself required choreography. Elbows close, movements small, hands never reaching beyond the boundary of a bowl, unless necessary. To reach far was to declare interest. To declare interest was to invite competition. The safest shape at a crowded table was compact. Even the way bread was broken mattered. A quick snap spoke of haste. Haste suggested plans. Plans suggested value. Slow breaking said, I am tired and ordinary, and I will soon leave without fuss. The room believed what your hands said more readily than what your mouth might have, had you dared to speak. Air was a messenger in crowds as much as in fields. The steam from hot broth marked you to those who wished to know, who had coin for warm food. A second bowl created a plume that drifted like a flag. Those who needed to be invisible ate cool and ate once. It was not a rule of taste, but of physics. Steam traveled and eyes followed it. Even the way you cooled a spoon could betray you. To blow was to lift your face and open your mouth, two movements that drew notice. To stir was better, to wait best. The press of bodies offered a false guarantee against theft. Many thought surely no one would dare with so many witnesses. Witnesses in crowds are like pebbles in a stream. They feel the current and scarcely move. The stealthiest hands acted within the permission the crush offered. A bump at the bench, an apology, a palm briefly beneath the table's edge, as if steadying a jug, and a cord was severed, a pouch eased. Travelers anticipated the apology before it came. They angled hips so a bump slid off rather than into them. They set their knees under the table's lip so that a searching hand met wood. They wore straps inward, knots under cloth, tails tucked where a blade could not find them without finding flesh first. Crowds contained echoes that outlived the meal. Your face, your gait, the small tilt of your head when you listened, these lodged in others' minds as surely as any taste lodged on tongues. When the room emptied, someone who had nothing better to do might drift after the person whose quiet marked them as careful, and therefore worth the trouble. The safest way to leave a crowded table was not to depart alone at once, but to leave in the middle of leaving, to busy yourself with your bowl as groups pushed back benches, to slide out with the small herd that always forms at a doorway, one more coat and a current of cloth. Not all danger at crowded tables came from malice. Crowds made accidents with consequences. A jug spilled on your bag forced you to lift it into sight and open it to check the damage. A bowl knocked into your lap forced you to stand and reveal the belt where your small tools lived. A coughing neighbor leaned your direction and you shifted, opening the cloak that had hid his second purse stitched into its lining. The room learned you without meaning to. Because of this, travelers dressed for mishap rather than for neatness. They wore under sashes that would not show when outer cloth moved. They packed small valuables where a sudden rise would not flash them to the hall. They prepared for other people's clumsiness as if it were weather. Conversation drew its own perimeter. Saying nothing made you suspicious. Saying too much made you known. The safe voice at a crowded table was soft and specific. Answer the question asked, and no more. Where from? From the road behind. Going where? To the road ahead. People respected such answers less than you might hope, and pressed again, but repetition is a kind of wall. Travelers learned to lean on it without seeming rude. They asked small questions in return, about bread, about the hour, about who owned the mule outside, not to gather secrets, but to give talk someplace to go that was not them. Children complicated everything. A child's hunger is frank. A child's reach is wide. A small hand will take a stranger's bread with the same innocence it uses to take a parent's. Crowds forgive children, and that forgiveness draws attention. To protect both child and goods, travelers turn mealtime into quiet tasks. Hold this cloth. Count these crumbs. Mind the jug while I tie this knot. Work made stillness. Stillness kept small hands close. Proximity kept danger where your eye could find it, even while your mouth was full. Health lingered in the edges of crowded tables, and not always kindly. In oppressive bodies, coughs travel, and the cold from the road settles quickly on tired lungs. Travelers guarded their throats in winter halls, not with draughts from strong drink, which many around them took, but with warmth they could carry, a scarf briefly raised, a sip of plain hot water, a bowl held close to the face for steam. They avoided borrowing cups. They let the first pour go to another when jugs were shared, counting how many mouths had passed before theirs. It was not fearfulness so much as arithmetic. The road punished small careless acts after the crowd had ended and the night had turned long. When the table emptied, the real test began. Meals softened vigilance even for the wary. Leaving asked you to tighten it again without showing strain. Travelers rehearsed the sequence in their minds while they still chewed. Bag first, strap second, coin hand never leaves the table until back hand has weight again. They learned to smile with their eyes, not their teeth, when thanking a host. Teeth kept people looking. Eyes ended the conversation from across a room. They timed their rising with those who were heavier laden, slipping behind a larger figure, whose bulk was a moving screen between them and onlookers. Once outside, they turned not toward the road they intended to take, but toward the one that allowed 2 extra corners. The first corner was for anyone casually curious. The second was where curiosity tires. Some travelers swore by the opposite tactic. Sit in the busiest place and act as if you belong more than anyone else. Confidence in a crowd is a cloak, but confidence requires rehearsal, and the road rarely gave time to practice. Most chose modesty that did not look like fear. They kept their belongings quiet and their movements neat. They matched the room's pace without either hurrying or lingering. The person who either rushes or dawdles is the one remembered. The one who moves when everyone else moves is memory proof. Not every crowded table housed danger. Many held nothing but tired hands and quick appetites. People, even in hard years, are often kinder than the traveler's fears allow. But caution taught by the road does not vanish because kindness appears. It stays, and it should. The art was to let caution guide without letting it spoil the meal. Bread tastes different when chewed like an alarm. Travelers fought that habit by granting themselves one calm minute in the middle of eating, a minute to look down at their hands and feel the simple gift of fullness, then to return to the work of watching. A small mercy in an anxious room becomes a kind of strength. What, then, made a crowded table safe enough? Not certainty. Certainty belonged to doors with bars and rooms with locks. Safety here was a sum of small choices. Wall behind, light ahead but not on the face. Bag on the leg, strap silent under cloth. Coin set out before the first bite. Answers that close rather than open. A leaving that begins inside the meal rather than at the door. Done together, these choices turned the loudest place into a murmur that passed over you, rather than through you. And after the meal, as footsteps carried you back into night, the table stayed behind with its smells, its heat, its jostle, and its lessons. The road outside felt colder but clearer. The crowd had hidden you and threatened you in the same breath, and you had taken what you needed from it without letting it take from you. Ahead, there would be nights when silence guarded you better than company, and others when company was the only shield you could find. Knowing which was which, that was travel's true craft, and every crowded table was a teacher. Have you ever paused on a long walk, tempted to sit right where you stood, because hunger pulled harder than patience? For travelers in older centuries, that impulse often came near the road itself. The path stretched before them, a ribbon of ruts or stones bordered by ditches or hedges. It seemed convenient. Why step farther when bread waited in the pack? Yet to eat close to the road was to turn the safest thread of their journey into its greatest risk. Roads connected everything, villages, markets, rivers, towns, and because of that, they connected everyone. At night or in the deep hush of evening, a road was rarely truly empty. Hooves, wheels, and feet pressed its surface at all hours, some in haste, some in silence. Eating within sight of that road was a declaration. It said to the passing world, "Here I am, tired enough to stop, hungry enough to forget caution, still enough to be seen." The dangers multiplied with each mile. Bandits, of course, knew the road was where hunger slowed people down. They did not need to watch whole regions. They only needed to linger where travelers were most likely to pause. A faint glow of a coal, a shadowed figure with food in hand. These were invitations. Even honest travelers sometimes posed risks. A stranger passing might decide that one sitting on the ground, hands full, could not rise quickly to defend themselves. And so the road, which gave direction, also gave exposure. But what made meals near roads especially dangerous was not only visibility, it was predictability. People stopped where the path widened, where a stone sat ready as a seat, where trees bent to offer shade. Anyone who studied the route long enough could guess the places where hunger would overtake caution. Have you ever noticed how bus stops or benches are always worn in the same spots? Because people naturally rest there? Roads had the same marks, only unmarked, and where people naturally stopped, others naturally waited. The problem went beyond human eyes. Roads carried sound farther than fields. The hard ground amplified each crack of bread, each drop from a flask. A person chewing just off the path might believe themselves hidden, yet their small noises carried down the line. Anyone listening 100 paces away could hear them. Even animals, dogs wandering villages, foxes searching ditches, were drawn by those sounds. Meals too close to the road turned the eater into the loudest object in an otherwise quiet line. Travelers who had learned the lesson passed it down as advice. Never eat within sight of the ruts. Go at least 100 steps into the field, or better, into a copse where branches break the view. Some measured farther. 200 steps was a common rule for those who could endure hunger a little longer. These numbers were not arbitrary. They were a buffer against both eyes and ears. 100 steps meant the glow of a small ember could no longer be easily seen. 200 meant the faint snap of bread might be lost to rustling leaves. Still, not all obeyed. Hunger sometimes dulled caution. A traveler too weary to count steps might sit right by the roadside ditch, believing themselves invisible in shadow. But shadows shift. A passing lantern, even half-shielded, caught them out. Wheels grinding past revealed their outline, and the moment food was in hand, their choices narrowed. To rise quickly meant dropping it. To hold on to it meant losing speed. Hunger made them slower, less guarded, easier to surprise. Those who traveled in groups divided their risks. One would eat while another kept watch, eyes fixed on the line of the road. But even this held limits. If someone approached too fast, there was barely time to scatter food and rise. The safest choice was still distance, not reliance on watchmen. For when danger arrived, it arrived not with warning, but with suddenness. A figure appearing at the bend, a cart rolling silently downhill, a rider's silhouette cresting a ridge. And yet, for all the warnings, there were still moments when eating by the road felt tempting. The road itself gave a sense of connection. Sitting upon it meant one had not left the journey, only paused. For some, this gave comfort, the feeling of still being on the path, of not losing direction. But that comfort was hollow. To eat too close to the road was to mistake convenience for safety. Travelers who learned the lesson too late often spoke of regret. They remembered how small the decision had seemed just to sit and eat, and how swiftly it unraveled. Some lost only food. Others lost coin. Some lost the road itself, driven away from it in fear after being startled or robbed. In memory, the taste of bread mingled with the bitter thought, if only I had walked a little farther. And so the rule hardened. Roads were for walking, not for eating. Hunger was patient, but danger was more patient still. The extra steps into field or grove cost little, yet spared much. The meal that waited was not only about filling the stomach, it was about protecting the body. And though it was the road that carried them forward, it was the road, too, that reminded them never to let down their guard too close to its edge. And since you've been walking this far with me into these quiet histories, I'll gently remind you, if these stories keep your curiosity alive, consider subscribing. It helps keep these forgotten details traveling farther, just as travelers once carried their lessons down the road. Have you ever watched the flicker of a candle and noticed how it makes a room look alive, as if walls bend and corners shift with each sway of the flame. For travelers on the road, that same flicker became both comfort and trap. Light brought warmth, made food easier to eat, and gave company to silence. Yet every shadow it cast stretched far beyond the meal itself, and those shadows often told more than travelers wanted. To eat in light was to declare presence. A small fire glowed like a beacon across fields. A lantern, even half-shielded, betrayed motion. Food in hand, glimmer on the face, steam rising from a bowl. All of it painted a picture clear to anyone watching from a distance. Have you ever glimpsed a light in the distance at night and felt immediately curious about who was there? That curiosity was universal, and it made every flame a risk. The problem lay not only in being seen, but in being interpreted. A flame might reveal whether a traveler was alone or in company. Shadows showed numbers, one long solitary shape, or several huddled together. A glow that flickered unevenly meant movement. Steady light meant rest. Even from far away, the way shadows shifted could tell an observer what a group was doing. Were they preparing food? Were they distracted? Were they already drowsy? All these answers lay in the dance of shadows. Travelers knew this and learned to tame light carefully. Some built fires low, ringed with stones, so their glow barely crept above the ground. Others set fires near tree trunks, letting bark absorb brightness rather than letting flames spill outward. Lanterns were wrapped in cloth, their beams reduced to slits. Eating by such lights was less comfortable, but it was safer. The fewer shadows cast, the less story they told to anyone watching. But even tamed light carried danger. A flicker on a face revealed features, and features revealed mood. Was the eater weary, careless, content? A watchful eye could read much from posture and expression. In a crowd, this did not matter. In solitude, it mattered greatly. A lone traveler caught smiling at food might appear unguarded. A figure hunched too far over bread might look weak. To strangers in the night, shadows sometimes betrayed more than words ever could. There was also the danger of habit. Travelers who grew used to fire's comfort sometimes forgot its cost. They fed flames too high, chasing warmth, only to make their camp a beacon. Others let lanterns swing as they ate, each sway sending flashes across the dark. Habit was dangerous because it dulled caution. The road taught the opposite. Every flame must be thought about. Every shadow must be considered. Even when light seemed safe, shadows misled. A branch cast against the ground looked like a crouched figure. The eater saw it move with the flame and startled, heart pounding, certain someone approached. Have you ever mistaken your own shadow for another's? Travelers faced this nightly, their own meals disrupted by fear of images born only of fire. Such fear wasted energy, but it also kept them alert, a paradox that many accepted. Companions divided light among them. One fire burned while others ate in its glow. Another companion sat apart in shadow, eyes tuned to the distance. This way, the group did not blind itself with its own brightness. They learned to eat half-lit, half-hidden, so that while one part of them enjoyed the comfort of warmth, another part watched for danger. It was an uneasy balance, but a necessary one. Some refused flame altogether, eating only in darkness. Bread in hand, teeth working slowly, eyes straining at shapes. This was not comfort, but invisibility. They claimed the stomach bore hunger better than the heart bore fear, and the heart feared light more than silence. Others argued differently. Without fire, nerves never eased, and nerves made mistakes. Both sides were right in their own ways. The truth was that each night demanded a new decision, and no rule served all times. The problem of shadows and light was not solved, only managed. Light fed hunger, but betrayed position. Shadows gave company, but told secrets. Travelers walked this tightrope with every meal, knowing that food nourished the body even as shadows revealed it. And so they ate quickly, fires low, faces turned away from the brightest glow, eyes shifting often. They learned that the safest meal was the one half hidden, never perfectly comfortable, never perfectly secure. The road did not allow both. To eat in safety was to accept unease, and to eat in comfort was to risk being seen. Have you ever noticed how something as small as sharing a piece of food feels safe in one setting but uncertain in another? If a friend at your table at home reaches for half of your bread, you barely think of it. But imagine yourself sitting at the edge of a road in the quiet night, your pack by your side, your hunger sharp from hours of walking. A stranger approaches, nods politely, and asks, "Will you share what you have?" In that instant, a simple act of kindness becomes complicated. The bread in your hand is not only food. It is proof of what you carry, a hint of your strength, and a test of your trust. For travelers of centuries past, sharing food was one of the most dangerous choices they could make. Not because bread itself had power, but because once it left your hand, it changed the balance between you and those who sat nearby. A shared loaf could become a bond, but it could also become a weakness. Food was both nourishment and a signal. It declared who had plenty and who had little, who could be pressed for more and who had only enough to survive. And when people walked miles through lonely stretches, every signal mattered. Travelers learned early that food was not just something to fill the stomach. It was a form of language, and every act of sharing spoke. To share generously said, "I trust you." To share reluctantly said, "I fear you." To refuse outright said, "I am cautious, and I do not wish for company." And the reply that came after often revealed the true character of the other. Some accepted a refusal with a shrug, moving on. Others pressed harder, blaming hunger, testing whether the traveler would yield. And a few saw in a loaf the measure of opportunity. If one had enough to share, perhaps one had enough to take. The dangers of sharing food began with numbers. A single traveler might think twice before breaking bread with a stranger. But when 2 or 3 sat together, the act shifted. The presence of many mouths turned food into a resource to be divided, and division revealed supply. One loaf shared among 3 showed plainly that more lay in the pack. A pouch opened to take one piece often showed the edge of another. A hand that hesitated too long over its contents revealed that choices were being made, that the traveler carried not only a crust, but perhaps dried fruit, cheese, or cured meat wrapped in cloth. Each glimpse was enough to stir curiosity, and curiosity on the road was a dangerous thing. Travelers often remembered the first lesson. Never show more than you mean to give. And yet sharing almost always required showing. Bread had to be broken. Grain had to be measured. Pieces had to be handed from one palm to another. Each motion unveiled more than one wished. The act of generosity was also the act of exposure. Some tried to mask their sharing in rituals. They cut bread with care, keeping the larger part hidden in the folds of their cloak, handing only the crust forward. They poured from flasks while holding the neck high, so the depth inside could not be seen. They learned to use their bodies as shields, bending over their bags, passing food with one hand while keeping the other pressed to their belongings. But no ritual was perfect. Those who watched closely still saw what they needed. The way a strap strained under weight, the way a bag settled back down heavier than expected, the faint smell of something better than bread drifting from the folds. Have you ever been in a room where someone opened a meal you did not know was there, and the scent filled the air instantly? Travelers knew that sensation all too well. The moment a stranger shared, the air betrayed them. The sweetness of fruit, the richness of cheese, the sharp edge of herbs, all of these spoke louder than words. Even if nothing was taken, then the memory of that smell lingered in the minds of others, who might later think, that traveler carries more than he showed. The greatest danger, however, lay not in the food itself, but in the bonds it created. To eat with someone was to create a connection, however brief, and connections could not always be broken as easily as they were formed. A loaf divided on one night could lead to expectation on the next. You shared before, a companion might say, so why not now? What began as kindness could turn into obligation, and obligation weighed heavier than hunger. Travelers spoke of stories where sharing became betrayal. A man once gave half his bread to a stranger at dusk. They ate together, and the man felt comfort in the company. But in the dark hours of the night, he woke to find the stranger gone, and with him the rest of the food. The kindness that had felt so human became a cost far greater than expected. These stories, told again and again, reminded travelers that trust was always a gamble. Even among companions, food created danger. Friends who walked together for weeks sometimes found quarrels sharpened when meals grew thin. Have you ever seen how a small cake or slice divided unevenly can cause argument among children? Grown men and women were no different. When one felt another had taken too much or had eaten too fast, bitterness grew. A journey that had begun with laughter ended with silence. The wrong share of food could undo bonds made stronger by miles of travel. Parents tried to teach their children the lesson gently. On the road, they asked them to break bread slowly, to pass it carefully, to take no more than was fair. But hunger does not teach patience easily. Many children grabbed quickly, and others wept if their portion seemed too small. The danger was not only in appetite, but in what appetite revealed: impatience, greed, need. Adults, too, carried those same impulses, only hidden deeper. And in the wrong moment, a small quarrel over food became the beginning of distrust. The dangers grew sharper in crowds. At wayhouses or market stalls, travelers sometimes sat at crowded tables. Bowls of stew or bread loaves passed along the benches. In such places, to share was expected. To refuse was to draw attention, and yet to share too openly meant letting strangers measure you. A person who gave away food seemed wealthy, and wealth on the road was never safe. But one who refused seemed selfish, and selfishness could also lead to trouble. In such settings, travelers learned the art of balance. giving just enough to satisfy expectation, but never enough to mark themselves as carrying plenty. Some developed small tricks. They kept one pouch for sharing, filled with coarse food, hard bread, dry beans, roots. When asked, they drew from that pouch alone, letting others believe that was all they had. Their better food remained hidden deeper in their packs, wrapped tight against smell. In this way, they controlled the story their sharing told. Others, less careful, found themselves exposed when a single gesture gave away too much. And the road remembered those who revealed more than they wished. But even with caution, danger lingered. Sharing was not only about food, it was about time. To sit and eat together was to stop walking, to rest, to expose yourself to whatever might come along the road. Meals lengthened when strangers were included, and lengthened meals gave longer chances for others to appear. A loaf shared quickly could have been eaten alone in silence, and silence would have hidden you. Instead, voices carried, laughter rose, fire burned longer. And what was meant to be simple kindness became a beacon for those who passed nearby. Have you ever noticed how quickly a group grows noisier when food is in hand? Quiet feet become stomps. Quiet voices become songs. Travelers knew this well. The more people who shared, the louder they grew, and the louder they grew, the less safe they became. Food did not only feed the body, it fed the mood, and moods carried farther than smell. So travelers learned. Some shared cautiously, some not at all. Some shared once and regretted it. Others refused often and carried loneliness as their shield. And though the road was long and the hunger real, the memory of danger kept their hands close to their packs. Sharing food was not always betrayal, of course. Many meals created bonds that lasted whole journeys. Friends were made, stories exchanged, kindnesses repaid. But danger was never far away, and travelers never forgot it. Every loaf broken, every cup passed, was weighed against the risk, because on the road the greatest dangers did not always come from storms or stones. Sometimes they came from something as simple as an outstretched hand and the words, "Will you share with me?" Have you ever noticed how people reveal more about themselves when they eat than when they speak? A tired hand trembles as it lifts bread. A weary face softens at the first bite. A person who chews slowly may show more than hunger. They may show exhaustion. For travelers in centuries past, every movement, every pause, every swallow betrayed something. Meals did not only fill the body, they revealed the truth of how worn that body was. And on the road, truth could be more dangerous than hunger itself. Travelers walked for hours, sometimes days, without proper rest. By the time they sat to eat, their muscles ached, their shoulders bent, their steps dragged. To share food or even to be seen eating meant showing how strong or how weak they were. If hands shook when breaking bread, others noticed. If eyes drooped, if bites were small, if posture sagged, it was clear the traveler's strength was waning. And once strength was shown as low, danger increased. Meals slowed the body. To chew was to stop moving. To stop moving was to lose rhythm. And once rhythm was broken, fatigue appeared in its full form. A traveler who looked steady while walking might look vulnerable the moment they sat down. The loosened cloak, the stretching of legs, the sigh as food touched lips. All of these betrayed how deep the weariness ran. Have you ever tried to hide your tiredness and then given yourself away with a single yawn? Travelers could not always stop that, and their meals exposed them. Companions, too, saw weariness during meals. Groups walking together judged each other silently. Who ate fastest? Who ate least? Who leaned heavily on their elbows? A traveler who left bread half finished told more than they meant to. Perhaps their stomach was too weak. Perhaps fear dulled their appetite. Perhaps exhaustion outweighed hunger. And companions sometimes reshaped their thoughts based on these signs. Some grew protective, slowing their pace to match the weakest. Others grew wary, fearing that a weary traveler might slow the group dangerously. And a few saw weakness as burden and began to wonder whether to leave the weary behind. Meals revealed more than weakness of the body. They showed weakness of spirit. A person who held food without eating, staring at it as though too drained to bite, showed a spirit close to breaking. Another who tore bread angrily, chewing fast as though fighting with each piece, showed a mind unsettled by worry. Hunger was not the only thing on the road. Fear, loneliness, longing all came to the table. And the table, whether crowded or solitary, revealed them without words. Even strangers could read weariness. At a wayhouse table, the way a traveler lifted a spoon could betray miles of hardship. Hosts who saw this sometimes offered sympathy, but others saw profit. A weary traveler was easier to charge more, less likely to argue. In less honest places, weariness meant easier targets for theft. Those too tired to guard themselves while eating were those least able to guard themselves afterward. Travelers tried to mask their fatigue, even during meals. They forced their bites steady, their posture upright, their hands firm. They tried to look stronger than they felt, hoping to discourage curiosity or pity that might turn to danger. But the body resisted disguise. A limp hand slipped from bread. A weary eye closed too long between blinks. A spoon shook against a bowl. No matter how much one tried, meals stripped away the masks walking allowed. Children revealed weariness most clearly. Hungry children cried before food was given, then fell silent the instant a bite was placed in their mouths. Their sudden stillness often drew attention. It said not only hunger, but exhaustion so complete that chewing seemed to restore life. Parents tried to hush this display, but the sight of children's fatigue spoke louder than their words. Families on the road feared such revelations. They made them targets for pity, or worse, for those who believed weakness meant easy gain. Have you ever thought about how the way you eat shows your mood? A happy meal is quick, careless. A tired meal is slow, heavy, deliberate. Travelers lived inside those differences, and when they ate, the truth of their condition shone brighter than the fire they sometimes lit. Some travelers used tricks to hide their weariness. They ate while walking, keeping their movements steady, refusing to stop long enough for others to see them sag. Others pretended eagerness, taking larger bites, speaking cheerfully, even if each word cost them effort. A few avoided food altogether until they could find safety, choosing to let their hunger deepen rather than let their weariness be displayed. These methods were not perfect, but they showed how dangerous it could be for fatigue to show itself so clearly. Yet meals could not be avoided forever. Hunger demanded to be met, and when it was, weariness inevitably surfaced. Companions saw, strangers noticed, even animals sensed when movements grew slow. Food gave strength, but before it gave strength, It revealed weakness. The road taught travelers harsh lessons, not only to guard what they carried, but to guard what their body revealed. And though meals were necessary, they were also moments of risk where the truth slipped out, no matter how carefully one tried to hide it. Have you ever stared into a fire at night and felt how it draws you in? How its glow makes the darkness feel less threatening? How the crackle of wood makes silence seem less heavy? For travelers in older centuries, fire was one of the greatest comforts on the road. It cooked food, warmed the body, and gave courage when shadows pressed close. But fire was also a double-edged gift. Its light betrayed position. Its smoke carried scents far down the wind. And every meal taken beside a flame invited risks that were not always seen until it was too late. To eat by a fire was to create a beacon. Even the smallest flame shone brighter against the night than one might think. A coal the size of a thumb could glow like an eye in the distance. A handful of sticks burning low could be spotted across a field, and a cooking fire with sparks lifting and smoke rising could be traced for miles. Have you ever noticed how you can see a candle from across a valley, but cannot see the valley itself? Travelers learned this lesson in hard ways. Light revealed more than they meant, more than they could control. Food cooked over flame revealed even more. The smoke of roasting grain, the steam of heated broth, the fragrance of herbs stirred into water, all of it drifted outward. To a hungry passerby, it was invitation. To a cautious wanderer, it was warning. To a thief, it was opportunity. A meal taken by fire was rarely private, no matter how deep in the forest or how far from the road it seemed. Yet travelers continued to risk it. Fire gave more than warmth. It gave the illusion of safety. Around a fire, one could pretend the night was held back, that shadows belonged outside its circle, that dangers stayed away. Companions felt braver, stories came easier, silence seemed less heavy. Meals by fire fed not only the stomach, but the heart. And for many, the comfort was worth the cost. Still, the dangers grew with each spark. Fireside meals slowed vigilance. Hands busy with food could not be ready for defense. Eyes lulled by flame lost sharpness. Laughter rose louder. Footsteps passing nearby went unnoticed. A group too content by the fire might forget to listen, and forgetting to listen was often the first mistake. Some travelers learned to build smaller fires, keeping them low, hiding them in pits dug into the ground, covering flames with stones so that only heat rose. The food cooked slower, the lights spread less far, and the meal tasted plainer, but the danger lessened. Others learned to mask their fires with smoke, choosing damp wood that kept the flame low though it filled the air with haze. They traded one risk for another, hoping smoke might look like mist, while knowing the smell still betrayed them. Companions divided tasks around fireside meals. One stirred while another watched the darkness. One ate first while another kept guard. Yet even then, mistakes slipped through. A guard drawn to the glow of the pot, leaning closer for warmth, left the shadows unwatched. A watcher tempted by the smell of food slowed their vigilance. And so the very thing meant to protect, the fire, often thinned their guard instead. Have you ever found yourself so absorbed in comfort that you forgot the world beyond it? Fireside meals carried that danger in every moment. The warmth, the light, the taste, They built a circle of safety that existed only in the mind. Beyond the circle, the road and the world remained the same, but travelers inside forgot. Stories told of travelers whose fires drew unwanted company. A group once cooked stew near a riverbank, believing themselves hidden by trees. Yet a glimmer on the water revealed their flame far downstream, where others waited. Before the stew was ready, strangers arrived. Another tale spoke of a lone wanderer who boiled water for grain, only to find wolves circling the scent before dawn. The lesson was repeated often. Food and flame together drew eyes, both human and animal. Even when no one came, the risk lingered. The smell of smoke clung to clothes, marking a traveler long after the fire died. Ash on hands revealed where they had rested. Coals left glowing could tell others that someone had been there recently. Fireside meals ended, but their traces remained. And yet, for all the danger, fire kept its place. It was too powerful to abandon, too human to resist. Travelers balanced its gifts against its risks, sometimes winning, sometimes losing. They learned to sit close but listen outward, to eat quickly but pack slowly, to let comfort touch them without letting it blind them. As we pause here in this quiet story, let me gently remind you, if you find calm in these histories and wish to hear more of them, consider subscribing. It helps these tales continue like small fires carried forward into the night. The truth remained unchanged. Every fire fed both the body and the dark. Every meal lit by flame brought danger as well as comfort. And every traveler who chose to eat by its glow knew that what warmed them could just as easily betray them. Have you ever noticed how the final act before sleep carries more weight than all the ones before it? The way you close a door, the way you fold a blanket, the way you check once more that nothing is left undone, all of it feels heavier, more important because it leads directly into rest. For travelers in earlier centuries, the last bite before sleep carried that same weight. It was never simply a meal. It was a decision that shaped how the night ahead would pass. On the road, food eaten at day's end was not just about hunger. It was about preparation. A traveler who ate too much risked sleeping too heavily, unaware of sounds beyond. One who ate too little risked waking in the night, stomach aching, body restless. The last bite was a measure between those extremes, chosen with care, adjusted to the place, the company, the silence. Many believed it was unwise to sleep hungry, for hunger sharpened dreams and kept the body from deep rest. Yet many also believed it was dangerous to sleep full, for a heavy stomach made one slow to wake, slow to rise, and slow to move if danger came. So the last bite was rarely feast. It was ration, balance, a small piece taken not to satisfy completely, but to steady. Have you ever left the table not entirely full, but calm enough to rest? That was the art travelers practiced each night. The place where that last bite was taken mattered just as much as its size. To eat before lying down meant choosing where to be seen. Some chose shadows, hoping to hide. Some chose walls of stone, ruins, or hedges, letting the land itself become their shelter. Others sat in fields, far from the road, believing distance itself offered safety. The wrong place chosen for that final meal often led to restless sleep. Travelers said that if the mind did not trust the place of the last bite, the body would not rest, no matter how weary it was. that company around that meal also mattered. Companions ate together quietly, voices lower than during the day, as if aware that night demanded silence. Strangers, if still present, made the final bite uneasy. Trust never came fully in darkness, and no one wanted to close their eyes, knowing someone unknown had shared their bread. Even among friends, food divided unequally at the last meal could stir tension. A small slice given unfairly could spark quarrel that lingered into the night. And night quarrels were dangerous, for they echoed louder in the mind than daylight disputes. Children often changed the rhythm. They needed more, not less, at the last meal. Parents gave them extra bites so they might sleep through the night without stirring. Yet that meant adults took less for themselves, trading rest for the silence of children. Families weighed such choices nightly. They chose tired hunger over the risk of a child crying in the dark, which could draw notice. Hunger was quieter than weeping, and so parents bore it. The last bite also revealed what a traveler valued most. Some saved a small sweet, like dried fruit, to end the day on comfort. Others saved the hardest crust, believing the toughest food should be eaten when no walking followed. Some drank only water, cleansing the taste of the road before sleep. Each choice told a story about the person and about what mattered more, pleasure, endurance, or simplicity. But even the smallest final meal betrayed truths. To chew slowly said exhaustion. To chew quickly said unease. To eat standing meant the body feared stillness. To eat lying down meant recklessness. Those who watched could read these signs, and many did. For on the road one was always observed, even when no eyes were seen. Not all dangers came from people. Animals, too, were drawn to the last meal. A crumb dropped near bedding meant pests in the night. The faint smell of food, too, near the pack meant a restless sleep, ears straining for scratches. Travelers learned to clean carefully after their last bite, scattering crumbs away, burying scraps, washing hands in streams when possible. They knew the smallest trace could disturb the night's calm, and yet, for all its risks, the last bite was treasured. It marked the boundary between toil and rest. It was the one moment when the road with all its demands seemed to pause. Bread tasted sweeter then, even if stale. Water seemed fresher, even if drawn from a muddy pool. Hunger, dulled for a little while, allowed the body to soften. And the simple act of chewing in quiet gave the traveler a sense of order, as though saying, "I have made it through another day." Have you ever lain down after a long day, feeling the weight of fatigue, but comforted by the knowledge that you did enough? That was what the last bite gave. It was not fullness, not satisfaction, but enough. Enough to close the eyes, enough to trust that the next dawn would be faced with at least some strength. Travelers passed this lesson down in sayings. Eat a little, sleep a little, wake with enough. The last bite should fill the spirit, not the stomach. Better a crust in silence than a feast in fear. Such words were repeated softly at night. Reminders that food was not only sustenance but safety, not only comfort but caution. And when the last bite was taken, travelers did not linger. They tucked their packs close, laid cloaks around their shoulders, listened once more to the world beyond, the wind, the trees, the quiet hum of insects, and then surrendered to sleep. The road might bring danger at dawn, but for that moment they had enough, because the last bite was not just food. It was survival measured, safety weighed, rest prepared. It was the line drawn between the day and the night. And every traveler who ever ate it knew that in its smallness lay the strength to rise again.